Hey, welcome everyone. This is Jose Palomino with another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. And today's guest is Stacy Sherman of Doing CX Right. And we're going to talk about a topic that is incredibly important to anyone who is in a competitive market. And that's probably you, just about everybody. And it's about getting customer experience right. Now, CX often sounds and can sound like, well, what is that? That seems like a big mysterious thing. Well, with Stacy, it's not. It's practical, it's pithy, it's actionable, and you'll get some great tips just off this interview with Stacy. So let's welcome her to the show right now. Hey, welcome, Stacy, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Hello, thank you.
Well, Stacy, one thing that's I think would be very helpful for our listeners, just because what you do is so interesting to me, but it's not something that maybe many of our listeners are familiar with. If you could just describe what you focus on and who you work with in terms of the services you provide, and then we'll take it from there.
Yes. So my passion and focus is customer experience. And that term is previously referred to as customer service, but it's not the same thing. Customer service, as we know about getting help from a brand, is one point of a customer experience, a customer journey. And the reason it's important is that if you could get that right and create satisfying moments throughout an entire journey of interacting with a brand, you get loyal customers for life who tell others if you really do it right. So I love this topic, and I've made it my career, having come from sales and digital marketing, which is a blend of all of this. But it's about differentiating brands, not just on price, but it's about experiences. So there's so much to say around that. And my livelihood is both two hats. One, I'm in a corporate role, leading customer experience for a big company, but I also am a coach and a mentor, a writer, keynote speaker about how to gain a competitive edge with CX at the forefront.
So CX, is that the term of art that gets used to capture this idea of customer experience?
Yes, exactly. I'm glad you clarified that. So hence doing CX right is my claim to fame. And a lot of people are starting to really understand that it is why people buy and come back and advocate for brands.
Now, a lot of our listeners and folks I tend to focus on are in B2B categories, right? So they're owner leaders, and they make machines, they make the parts that go into machines, or they install the machines. I mean, they generally, industrial services, some professional services, and so on. So I could see somebody listening now and saying, listen, our machine has a competitive edge. It's better than the competitor's machine. That's why people buy from us. And of course, if somebody has a problem, we take care of it. Why do I need to think about this any more than that?
So when you say we take care of it, well, is that from the inside employee perspective? Or is that from the customer buyer perspective? Because a lot of times companies make their decisions, build products, value propositions from within. And what happens is they're really not meeting the customer needs and expectations. So customer experience in the right framework validates that you're doing all that right. It's building from the outside in versus the inside out. And so that's why it's important to measure customer satisfaction, the level of effort to do business with you, and also even within the inside, the employee engagement. How engaged are they to deliver customer excellence and go up and beyond? What's your culture like? All of that is so important if you really want to sustain and grow in competitive times.
So you hit this notion of competitive times, and I want to really expand on it a little bit, where I think customer experience could be so valuable. And one of the reasons I was excited to have you on the show is most people in industrial categories are, let me say the opposite. Very few are ever category of one truly. They are, someone else makes a machine similar to theirs. Someone else offers the same kind of precision fabrication capabilities that they offer and so on. But do you find that in those like kind of, let's call them rough and tumble, heavy metal kind of industries, that that customer experience from the customer's point of view really makes that big a difference, or aren't they just looking for the best price?
No, it's not about best price. Price has to be obviously within line of their expectation. However, think about it. If you go take your car into the shop and the experience is no one communicates to you, they do what they do, they give you a bill and nothing more. Well, you're left with what happened. Did anything even get fixed? Right. So let's just start with that communication. I don't care what company you are. If you are not responsive, if you are not telling the customer, giving them updates and status, or let's say you're waiting on a part and it's causing a delay.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not transparent and communicate with the customer, I don't care how good your price is, they're going to be frustrated. They're going to leave or go another time somewhere else.
Right. So you may not lose that order, for example, but you don't get, also mysteriously, they never called you for another job.
Well, and worse, you don't even know that they're leaving. And even worse, they badmouth you to their colleagues. And social media, of course, is really powerful, and ratings and reviews. So it has an amplification effect of not doing CX right.
Okay, so now, but when you describe some of the things you help people do, you know, customer surveys, surveying their own employees, looking at their processes, and so on, I could see somebody listening to this who says, "Okay, you know, we got a nice little healthy $10 million fabrication business of some sort, 30 employees, we're all doing okay. What you just suggested sounds like an awful lot of work. Like, how do I start? I mean, do I have to do all of that? Do I do some of that? It just makes my head hurt. So, what would you say to that person?
Yes, that's very fair. And I'm a big advocate of crawl, walk, run.
Okay.
So crawling is very much about taking one of the components of a CX framework. So let's start with just journey mapping, literally mapping out the walking in the customer's shoes. What does that look like? How does your customer, your buyer persona, who you're targeting, how do they learn about you? That's the awareness phase.
Mm.
A lot of times that's marketing. How do they become aware of you? Is it in trade magazines? Is it through a sales force? Is it through a website? Walking through the whole journey and designing with your internal team. It could be a team of one or different departments. The more you can bring people together of different skills, mapping out the customer journey, and also making sure that everybody understands how they affect the customer journey. So if you say, for example, the billing finance department, they might say, well, I'm not the front line. I have nothing to do with the customer experience. And I'd say, oh, yes, you do. Because how customers pay their bill can make or break the whole experience. So mapping out the customer journey, there's a real methodical steps to it. Once you do that with your internal team, then the magic happens where you validate the way you designed and you think that your customer wants that journey to be. You review it and make sure, does it meet their expectations? Why or why not? And design for that and grow to it. So, for example, if let's pick one point in the customer journey, as we talked about customer service. If your customer wants to be able to talk to you on the phone, you've got to make it easy that there's a 800 number or a dedicated rep or whomever that they could call. But sometimes there's products where people don't want to call, they want to online chat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you need to know that and build for that and scale for that.
And the good news is there's so many service providers now that help you.
Yes.
You know, you can add a instant chat capability, and they'll even say, do you want it AI driven or do you want a human being behind that? I mean, whichever one you want.
Yes. So there's all these micro moments, we call them moments of truth,
Okay, love that.
that the holistic customer journey is essential to get it right. Because if you got them, if you did a great job in selling, they bought, they got their product, but then, like I said, if paying their bill or getting help later in the journey is really a high level of effort, it doesn't matter that the beginning was great. It doesn't matter that your price was wonderful. If they are stuck, if these become dissatisfiers, that's where you'll lose them. So a customer experience framework and why people hire people like me is to make sure that you at least get the basics right. And then you can do more of these sophisticated methodologies.
Now, Stacy, I would imagine that if so I'm visualizing again a small team, maybe a 5, 6 person leadership team. They get into a conference room. There's a whiteboard, and they start with, okay, like you said, awareness. How do people learn about us? So you start writing that down. And I'm a whiteboard person, so I always think in terms of whiteboards. And you start, just like there's almost like this series of bubbles. Then this happens, and this happens, and so on. I'd imagine that a lot of people, once you put it up there, even before you test it with a customer, some things will be obviously ridiculous that you're asking for a particular, that you have, why is that step in there? Why do we ask that? Well, we used to do that. That was 10 years ago, but we still ask for it. And those are little frustrating, things, maybe no one big knockout punch, but even little things that really irritate, right? I call them irritants. You call moments of truth is a better way of saying it. But I often think about what do we do to irritate customers? And a lot of organizations do a lot of little things to irritate customers, and they add up.
And they're preventable.
And they're preventable. They don't have to be that way. That's really good. I was thinking, for example, sometimes in manufacturing, you have the idea of a rush charge, right? So you just sometimes somebody really needs something and you need to expedite it, and there's a cost to that. And I've asked clients, I said, how well do you communicate that there's going to be a rush charge on that invoice for the request? Well, we don't want to get them upset. They need it. They're going to pay for it anyway. And I'm thinking, have you ever got one of those bills? Like with like also it's like it's 10% more than you thought you were going to pay. Yeah. That's an irritant, right? And to your point.
Yeah. So as part of what I call humanizing business, it is about communication. It's about proactive communication. It's about surprise and delight and wow moments. And you can also avoid those irritants by being transparent and upfront. And truthfully, if you even make a mistake, because we are human and it happens, but customers are more forgiving when you are honest and upfront and they can trust you. They'll forgive. They'll be frustrated, but they'll let go versus hiding the cost in there and then, pretending it never happened. And then they call you out and then you make excuses. Like that's just a recipe for disaster.
Right. You can't gaslight your customers and expect a positive response. And I was just thinking about like every 10-year-old knows the experience of, do I hide the broken vase, the pieces of it, or do I just fess up to it now? Because either way, I'm going to have to deal with it, right? When you're 10, you don't know better, but hopefully if you're running a business, you should know better.
Yes, but also it is get the basics right, like pick up the phone. The it's not hard. We're not talking about supply chain delays. We're talking about pick up the phone, tell your customer, I haven't forgotten about you. There is a part on order. It's causing a slight delay. I haven't forgotten about you. I'm going to call you in 2 days and let you know the status. Okay. I mean, there's no cost to the business. It's moments of time of calling.
Right.
And goes miles in keeping that customer and preventing those irritants.
Wow. So yeah, and it comes down to you don't need a fancy CRM system to pull that off. You need a Post-it note. Yeah, I'm saying it's better if it's better, but even if you don't have any of those things, you can just do it because you decide to do it. It's a better way to be. And I love the pick up the phone side, the humanizing side of this. So what it seems to also do, Stacy, and I just want to get your take on this. This approach not only makes for a better, you call it the customer journey, right? Their experience with you, but it also tends to, it seems to me, would tend to make the whole experience more collaborative. It gets you closer to your customer. Is that one of the outcomes that you see come out of this process?
Yes, and the
Okay.
the and is it gets you closer to your staff.
Hmm.
It makes them feel part of the process, empowered, especially the points in the journey that they have a big impact on. And that is gold because they will be committed to customer excellence even when the boss isn't in the room.
Wow. Because you've actually, it's your process. It's not.
Well, they're collaborating and they're part of the experience design
Hmm.
and they feel vested in it. And the culture is so important. You have to have a customer centric culture. The customer feels it, they see it, and that's an important ingredient.
So let me take kind of a slightly different, a contrarian tack on this just for a moment. I could
Yeah.
I could easily see some owners saying, well, if I ask and I engage my customers with a lot of questions about what would make the experience better, they may ask me for things I cannot do. So in a sense, I'd rather not ask and just kind of keep doing our best job. We have high integrity. We're going to do our best to take care of our promises. We will communicate, but more than that, I'm concerned as a smaller company having to all of a sudden step up to a line that we don't have the means to do. How would you respond to that person?
You have to be transparent. You have to be able to deliver on the promise. So, for example, I was reaching out to a vendor to say, I want to do some text communications and feedback so that when you buy the product, I can text you a smile, frown, and a happy face, whatever. And they said, we can't do that. We can do XYZ instead, but I can't do that. Well, I appreciated that they were honest. They're building it into their roadmap. I happen to want it now. I'm considering their alternative, but they were smart to say that they can't do it exactly the way I'm asking. Because if they did and they were working around it in the end, if they wasted my time,
Hmm.
forget that. I would absolutely be irate. And I'm not the type of person to blow apart brands on social media, but there are many people that do.
Right, there's people that's their reason for living, for getting up in the morning.
They are. They are. They're just out there. And so that's why transparency is key. It's not even a nice to do, it's a have to do.
Right, right. Wow. Okay. So just quickly as our time coming to an end, and Stacy, thank you. These are some like really great insights for anybody listening. You're getting a lot from Stacy Sherman at doingcxright.com on this issue of customer experience and why it's so important. And Stacy, you hit on the collaboration or collaborative process that gets you closer to your employees as well as to your customers. So if somebody listening to this saying, well, I think I have a pretty good customer experience, I think our customers often tell us they really like dealing with us.
Mhm.
Isn't that enough? What else do I have to do to really kind of get a sense of where I stand? Like, suppose somebody listening says, but maybe there's room for improvement. How would I even get my head wrapped around that? Seems like a big topic. I'm not sure I can tackle all of it.
Yes. So again, crawl, walk, run. I would pick some of those moments of truth, those points in the customer journey to talk to customers,
Hmm.
to get feedback. So let's say, for example, you just onboarded a customer. They signed a contract, you onboard them 30, 60, 90 days, and you might have a trigger point after that to say, how has your experience been so far? How can we make it better? What would you have liked differently? So you pick, there's different points in the journey, and you ask your customer. They'll tell you. You have to ask, and you can't not ask because you're afraid. And you can't also only ask your employees or frontline staff because they're not the customer. So I recommend both. Get your employee feedback and get your customer feedback and marry it all to decide, what do you improve? How do you prioritize it?
Right, because you can't maybe tackle everything all at once, but you can tackle one thing, and
Absolutely.
and especially if it's the biggest irritant. One thing also, in the way you describe that, talking to your employees and your customers on the same issue, also there's a major disconnect between how your employees see what you're doing for customers and how customers see what you're doing for customers. It'd be good to notice that, to say, oh boy, we have a reality distortion zone going on, and we have to fix that too, because we're not even thinking about things the right way. That may be a bigger issue as well.
Yes. And that's an opportunity to build the culture, because if you get feedback from a survey, or you go on and you see social media and ratings and reviews and other voice of the customer
Mm-hmm.
feedback, you bring that in and you make that on your agenda, and you talk about and you problem solve together. And you also listen really loudly. You celebrate those good moments too. Because a lot of times customers are saying, John Frank was amazing. He did such a good job for us. You have to stop and acknowledge that person and say thank you, and help others see what are those best practices so that they do the same thing. So it's both using the feedback to celebrate, drive more of that behavior, as well as coaching opportunities when things don't go right.
Got you. Wow. Well, Stacy, I think we could go on for quite a bit, because this is a deep topic, and it really is. At some level, somebody might say, "Well, that's very commonsensical." Yes, but and I have definitely found in my over 10 years working with owners like in businesses like this, no one's doing it. Very few people do it intentionally, right? So I often say people have good customer service or customer experience intentions. They like their customers, they want to do right, but they haven't built the processes or thoughts around how to actually execute against those intentions. And I think that's a big part of your work. So if somebody listening to this said, "Gee, Stacy sounds like she's really dialed in on this, and I'd like to know more about her and her work," what's the best way for somebody to learn more about you and what you do?
Yes, I'd love that. So doingcxright.com. And on my website, you'll see my podcasts. I have 2 co-authored books, my newsletter, free tips I'm sending out all the time. And spend some time with me. Book a mentoring session, and you really can do CX right. It's in your control, and it really works. It really differentiates brands.
Wow, I love it. Stacy, thank you so much for being part of the Revenue Throughput podcast today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.